Welcome to the Harry Jackson Show. I am your host, Harry Jackson, and it's snowing here in the Washington, D.C. area. And a whole lot of people have been saying it's been snowing in D.C. for a long time. And they've been snowing you about the debt. They've been snowing you about laws. And now nature is reflecting the snow that's been going inside the Capitol building. Well, our job here this morning in the first segment is to talk about several key stories. I'll introduce a couple of them, and David Parlett, my co-host, will talk with me about these key stories. And then we've got an exciting show for you a little bit later on. Remember, you can reach us at Bishop Harry, hashtag The Harry Jackson Show, or Facebook.com/HILC2. One of the most ludicrous stories in the world today is football supports rights for same-sex marriage. Now, number one, I wonder what kicking the pigskin has to do with marriage. Number one, NFL hopes to be open to gay players. Time out. This is March Madness, not football madness. I don't really think that the president of the NFL Players Association needs to be commenting on such things. And I think it's an assault on our intelligence. So I don't want to make crass football jokes about the guy ran into one player too many, hit his head on the wall. He went into combat without his helmet. I don't want to say anything crass like that. I simply will say that projecting the majority of Americans agree with him, the issue is what happens in the next generations. So I think that there is a lot that we're going to have to talk about concerning same-sex marriage. Let me remind you that the High Court is going to take up the same-sex marriage issue this week, both with DOMA, the whole issue of marriage and the Defense of Marriage Act signed into law by none other than President Bill Clinton in 1996. We found that Hillary Clinton recently came out saying she supports same-sex marriage. Her party did so and has been pushing it, and we expect that. It's a political football right now. Also, there's a great article in the Washington Post that we're looking at in the newspaper this morning. The title says, by Robert Barnes, High Court could take cautious path on gay marriage. I don't want to say duh. They are famous at supporting and reporting the obvious. Also, this newspaper has been unashamedly pro same-sex marriage, but I think that they understand that there's overwhelming support for same-sex marriage out there among people. They've got a lot of money. And the difference between the 1967 case, Loving versus Virginia, is that you don't have power, money arrayed against a minority group. First of all, gays are not a minority in the classic sense of the word. There is not some kind of unchangeable, immutable characteristic that defines gays. In fact, I'd like to quote Margaret Cho, who got married as a heterosexual, then came out that she was a lesbian, then got back, evidently with her husband, and now describes her sexuality as fluid. I'm confused. So is she. So the reality then is we do not have some discernible factors against which people can be necessarily discriminated against. You don't even know what they are in terms of sexual preference, choices, orientations many times unless they choose to tell you. So there's not necessarily this great bullying effect upon them. In fact, this week, the music people that were set up for the great rally that's happening Tuesday, a march, and then a program in Washington, D.C., some of the music people had to decline from playing with our great March for Marriage that's going on tomorrow here on the Hill. They had to back out because they had death threats. So the people who say that they're being bullied are actually bullying, and we're in this amazing vortex of activity, name calling, and the civil rights conundrum, I want to call it. So the high court should be cautious. Now, you are listening, people of goodwill here who believe in traditional marriage all around the country. You need to write an email to the Supreme Court. Let your voice be heard. There are people who are lining up right now, being vocal and vociferous in their absolute cry that there must be the right to marry for people who are gay. Well, if we are looking for marriage equality, then I say everybody who wants to be married should be married if that's what they think. Then polygamy, 5 people, 5 women married to 1 man. Isaiah chapter 4 says, in that day, prophetically declaring, 7 women will lay hold on 1 man and say, let us be known by your name, and we'll take care of everything else. And so if you want to go for whatever it is, then why don't we say 7-1 is all right? No, we don't want that. We don't know. You do want whatever you want, and you want it on your terms. And what you want is the nose, the camel's nose under the edge of the tent routine, so that eventually we get every far-flung concept of marriage we can imagine into this discussion. But you don't want to shock folk. We just want it step by step. Americans, wake up. We are at a place where our rights are being infringed upon. More than likely, it's about the next generation, what we will be taught in class, in school, and what will be shoved down your children's throat in the name of equal education. That's my concern, has been my concern. Forgive that dry cough there. That's the end game that everybody's been dealing with. And I don't think it's about rights for marriage for people in this land. It's really about a group wanting to be seen as equal and the law being the benchmark of a sense of equality for gay people. So equal marriage for everyone means that no matter what your concept, and I won't demean anyone by starting to rattle off concepts of marriage that could be taped and make everything sound ludicrous. I'm simply going to say we're going to move forward. And the NFL shows that they've hit, some of these guys have taken too many hits on the head. Concussions are frequent in that group. And civil rights-oriented thinking is not common. Also, a civil rights group counters NRA plan to beef up school security is a group I've never heard of. And the report by the Advancement Project sounds wonderful. Who in the world are they? Long active on school issues, at least says Donna St. George, and I don't know who she is either. They are saying that there is a report scheduled to release for Thursday, 5 days before the NRA plan to unveil a more detailed version of its December proposal to increase school security, placing armed police in every U.S. school. And it's going to say we don't need police. Well, I'm going on record. We've been trying to reach out to NRA representatives. I, for one, know that we already have metal detectors and armed people in some of our urban schools. We probably need more of those in urban high schools. I would like to see this plan. I would like to beef up armed guards in our urban centers. I would like to save some of the lives of young people being squandered through gun violence in urban America. And it seems that because of black on black crime, the value of black and Hispanic lives in urban America are not valued as much. It really does, because nothing happens when these kids are killed. Part and parcel of this plan needs to be some kind of addendum that deals with the violence in these tough African American and Hispanic communities. So at that point, I'm going to stop my discussion of the top issues of the day, bring David Parlett into the discussion. And Pastor David, the top three things we discussed: NFL, speaking out on marriage, the fact that there is going to be a big marriage march coming up on Tuesday, and 3, NRA civil rights conflict going to be discussed. What do you think is the big story of the day of these 3?
Yeah, Bishop, hi, and good morning to everyone. Certainly the marriage, same-sex marriage issues, Supreme Court even tomorrow. It's a major issue here in America, and we know most people are for marriage between a man and a woman, but we're being made to believe that all of the country is in favor of seeing same-sex marriage. And, of course, we're so dangerously close to that tipping point for churches where we can lose our religious privileges, and as we've heard in the news, some folks actually get locked up for simply standing on their Christian faith and believing that, for instance, I can't bake a cake for a lesbian wedding and out in Oregon, and some father up in, I believe it was Massachusetts, up north, he is trying to have his 6-year-old child understand that he doesn't have to be bullied and learned that this child has to learn about same-sex marriage. He wants to protect his child, and so they want to put him in jail. So we're so close to losing our religious freedoms because the bullying tactics of the same-sex marriage. So certainly we believe that's a very critical topic.
Well, let's unpack that just a little bit. What we're saying is that the polls are talking about the freedom for someone to live and love someone of the same sex. But the issues that we're dealing with, you and I, and many people of faith around the country, are the issues of our freedom to preach what we preach and for the next generation to be taught what we believe. And it seems to me this is apples and oranges. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
So I think the polls are disingenuous, and what we are getting is this sales job that says, you're a bigot, you're a bigot, you're a bigot, because you don't want us to be together. And the discussion has really shifted from being together till we want your children. 30 years ago, there was a humanistic, or I should say a homosexual manifesto that talked about these things. And basically that manifesto said, we're coming after your children. We're going to turn them out, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the challenge. We have 30 more seconds. Do you have one final thought about why you are against same-sex marriage in this culture?
It definitely, Bishop, it's because of the children and our grandchildren. 2 men, 2 women can do whatever they want to do, but when they come and attack us and want to change the definition of marriage and change our rights and force our kids to accept their way of life, that is my highest concern.
Well, I think that's a great concern. Folks, we're going to be right back, and our guest in this next hour, is going to be Ken Kluslowki. He's been with us before, great guest, and he is the director of a Center for Religious Liberty, and he's also connected with FRC. And you don't want to miss this segment. We'll be right back on the Harry Jackson Show.
Since I'm a veteran, I get my medical coverage through the VA. But when Nancy and I got married a year ago, she didn't have health care. We heard about Medishare on the radio, and God put it on our heart to become members. We loved the biblical concept of Christians sharing each other's medical bills, and the plan we picked was a great fit for our budget. Just 1 week after we signed up, Nance had to have emergency surgery for appendicitis. If it weren't for Medishare, we'd have had to take out a hefty loan. Instead, we only had to pay a small portion, and fellow members shared the rest. We are so grateful for Medishare.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your Medishare information guide, call 855-SALM-23. Not available in Kentucky or Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-SALM-23. That's 855-SALM-23.
Here's Dan Celia with today's Stewardship Moment.
It's amazing to me how we sometimes resent the mentioning and speaking about money and stewardship from the pulpit, yet it's repeatedly mentioned in the Bible. Chapter 15 in 1 Corinthians is an awesome affirmation of Christian hope and everlasting life. At the end of the passage, the first verse of chapter 16, Paul says, "Now, about the collection for God's people." See, the collection was as sacred to Paul as all the other things in chapter 15. Like it or not, giving is, in fact, the inevitable consequence of true Christian faith.
You've just heard a Stewardship Moment with Dan Celia of Financial Issues Ministry, helping you plan, give, and invest wisely. For more information, log on to financialissues.org. That's financialissues.org.
You're listening to the Ankerberg Minute with apologist and best-selling author Dr. John Ankerberg.
I've often met with dear Jehovah's Witness friends who have claimed, "Hey, I'm a Christian too." But are Jehovah's Witnesses Christians? Well, not in the biblical definition of that word. The word Christian was first used in Acts to refer to people who believed that Jesus Christ was God's Son, resurrected from the dead. According to this original definition, Jehovah's Witness teaching would not be Christian. Why? Because they teach that Jesus was formerly the Archangel Michael, and that he was recreated as Jesus, who is nothing more than a perfect human being on earth. Further, they do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Maybe you could help a Jehovah's Witness friend to come to know Jesus as God incarnate, fully man, fully God, who died for our sins and rose from the dead.
For additional resources on this topic, log on to johnankerberg.org.
Welcome back to the Harry Jackson Show. I'm your host, Harry Jackson. We want to hear from you today. You can tweet us at Bishop Harry, hashtag The Harry Jackson Show. And you can reach us at facebook.com/HLC number 2. You know, we've got a lot to talk about today. One of the hottest issues of our generation. I don't know how we have lost the messaging battle on this issue. And what I mean by the messaging battle is that if you think about the issue of apologetics, we talked with Doug Murin, one of our team, with the group that we work with, the International Communion of Evangelical Churches. Apologetics gives the why of the gospel of our worldview. And very often the gospel is the what. Now, it's obvious the what of the gospel is same-sex marriage and other things of this nature. We're not supposed to do that. That's obvious. The why is why it's to their advantage, the culture's advantage, not to break with what God wants. And so whenever our viewpoint has not been teamed with a compelling why, people say, don't meddle in my life. I don't want to hear your opinion. I don't care what you think. So we are dealing with a lot of hassles today because people have rejected our rationale see us as bigots, but the next generation is why I'm fighting. So here in the studio, we have David Parlett, who is our co-host, and we also have on the line Ken Kluslowki, who for me really opened my eyes on a lot of issues, including Obamacare. And David and I are going to just hit you with a lot of questions. We won't have time for all of them, but do the best you can. And we're just going to have a fluid conversation, Ken. Now, Ken, there's a big battle over natural and traditional marriage. Can you help our listeners understand what's happening in the Supreme Court this week? Welcome to the show, by the way.
Good morning, Bishop, and thank you for having me. This week is a historic week for marriage in this country. The U.S. Supreme Court is going to hear two cases this week on Tuesday and Wednesday, March 26 and 27. God willing, I plan to be in the courtroom on both days as an attorney involved in this litigation. The Tuesday case, March 22nd, is Hollingsworth v. Perry. And the question there is whether there is some sort of implied fundamental right in the U.S. Constitution, that is to say, not found in the words of the Constitution, but implicit in the concept of due process in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, that forbids any state from defining marriage as one man and one woman because there is an implied right to same-sex marriage and quite probably also polygamy. And what I mean is if you're just defining marriage as the union of consenting adults, well, there's nothing inherent in that says it can just be two, especially since over 50 nations around the world use polygamy. This, of course, is the Prop 8 case where California amended its state constitution to say marriage is the union of a man and woman, and there's a team on the left that brought a lawsuit saying that California provision violates the U.S. Constitution. That is Tuesday. Then
wow,
the Wednesday
that's
case,
all of that on Tuesday.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Then the next day, on March 27, we're going to hear U.S. United States versus Windsor, which is a case out of New York, which asks whether Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, is unconstitutional. Section 3, many of your listeners are probably familiar with Section 2. That says if one state creates gay marriage, that other states are not automatically bound to recognize those marriages. This is the other big part of that law. Section 3 says that for purposes of federal law, marriage is the union of one man and one woman as husband and wife. That would be for income tax joint filing purposes, for immigration purposes. There's over 1,000 provisions in federal law that reference marriage, and this just says that for all of those provisions, it's one man and one woman, whether that also is unconstitutional.
Let me ask you a question on this whole thing. Someone said to me the other day, why don't we go back to all marriage is civil marriage, and only the church or civil union, only the church can create the institution of, quote, marriage. Government stay out of marriage. Civil unions is the rest of it. I said, obviously, we've gone too far. The marriage has been taken over by the state. His idea sounds wonderful, but it's impractical. What say you? Did I give them the right answer?
Not only impractical, but beyond that, I don't think it's an issue of us having gone too far. I would say instead, Bishop, that there are aspects of our system of laws where there is no substitute for marriage, because marriage treats two human beings as one person in many things that you cannot enter into a contract for. For example, you have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination if you were to be prosecuted for some sort of crime. Also under the Fifth Amendment, though, your spouse can never be compelled to testify against you, because the idea is, again, in the eyes of society, you are regarded as one person, and you can't be made to testify against yourself. Now, obviously, for that and many other provisions, okay, if you don't get arrested and if you're not being charged with something, most people won't run into that. Let's look at things that people do run into, being able to file a joint tax return. Again, that comes from the idea that a married couple should be regarded as one person, that what God has joined together, let not man separate, that those two are indivisible, and so it's appropriate for them to pay their taxes together. Obviously, we have a tax code for immigration purposes. If you are an American citizen and you get married to someone who is a foreigner, because he or she is your better half, the law entitles that person to come and join you in this country and to remain with you. Again, if the government were out of marriage, that would not be an issue. And the list goes on and on. There are plenty of aspects of our society where marriage, if you have a married man and woman, this is one that most people run into. It happens with every childbirth. If you have a married man and woman, and the woman gives birth to a child, the law automatically presumes that the husband is the father of that child. If the mother dies in childbirth, if something terrible happens, that man instantly has all the rights and obligations of a parent as soon as that child is born, because the idea is that a husband and wife, that is an institution recognized by law to protect the raising of children, and so if that woman is having a child, it belongs to that man. Otherwise, you would have to get a court involved and have invasive blood test and DNA testing and a court order for every single birth in this country before that child had the protection, not just of his mother, but also of a father.
Wow, this is really amazing. So this is a huge deal, and the definition of marriage is huge. One, before David Parlett gives you a question, we want to give Twitter shout-outs to Pastor Frank Reed from Baltimore, my dear friend, and we really appreciate him and his lifelong work. I shouldn't say lifelong, but decadal work, 20 years work here in Baltimore. Tremendous preacher, a Yale graduate, intellect, and also a local business. Is that Cons? And they are asking the question, where is the tolerance for traditional marriage? I think Ken will come ask you that question a little later. It does seem like we're having challenges. Thank you all for retweeting some of our information and asking the question of others. We've got to send this message to the Supreme Court as well. Pastor Dave, you got a question?
Yeah, we hear this right for the same-sex marriage is the same as the Loving versus Virginia, that famous interracial marriage case in 1967. Is this really the same fight?
Not at all, and thank you for the question, Pastor. In Loving v. Virginia, the court held that we enacted 3 constitutional amendments after the Civil War to get rid of the scourge, not just of slavery, but of all forms of racial inequality that went with it. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution were adopted by this country in the 1860s after the Civil War. And as the court held in Loving v. Virginia, which was a Virginia law saying that a black man could not marry a white woman. Now, it had nothing to do, by the way, with other racial pairings. Just a black man could not marry a white woman. There was nothing about Asians, et cetera, et cetera. So it was this oddly selective racial law to start with. But beyond that, the court held that the central purpose of the Equal Protection Clause was to eradicate racial discrimination, which is exactly correct. All of these other concepts we've tried to force into the 14th Amendment over the past 40 years, like abortion, those, of course, were not at all part of the original meaning of it. But the provision that we adopted in 1868 was designed to get rid of laws exactly like that Virginia law. So that's what was going on in 1967. It was just enforcing the natural original meaning of the 14th Amendment. Of course, that whole rationale of ending racial discrimination has nothing whatsoever to do with the concept of redefining marriage. And the marriages at issue in 1967 was the marriage of one man and one woman.
Absolutely. And we found in the marriage battle in Washington, D.C., just to add on to that, that Washington, D.C. rejected appeal for people to have same-sex marriage early on in the 70s here in D.C. based on this rationale. Then we tinkered around, or I should say the district tinkered around with definition of marriage, tinkered around with definition of law, came and repassed laws on this level. But I'd say for the next 10 or 15 years after this law was passed in 68 on through the 70s and the 80s, no one would have thought that same-sex marriage would apply to anything like this. The guys on the radical gay marriage side have been forcing a meaning and trying to, it's almost like repeat a lie long enough and it becomes the truth. It seems like that's been part of the rationale. So they say, this is the same as that, this is the same as that, this is the same as that, is part of my answer. Ken,
and
the
I would
Washington
say,
Post
Bishop,
says,
one thing that it's critically important that people need to start talking about, because this is the next wave of litigation, is that there's 192 nations recognized around the world. Over 50 of them have legal polygamy. It is, of course, sanctioned under Islam, which is the second largest religion on earth, with 1.2 billion adherents. Surveys show there are 600,000 people in this country right now who are in polygamous marriages. The purpose of something like DOMA, it's not just same-sex marriage. DOMA defines marriage as, quote, one man and one woman. If DOMA were struck down, it would open the door for the government to have to recognize polygamous marriages as well, because the marriage at issue in U.S. v. Windsor was not an American gay marriage. It was a Canadian gay marriage from 2007. Then one of those women, one of those lesbian partners, died in 2009 before their home state of New York even recognized same-sex marriage. And this whole lawsuit about the Supreme Court is whether the surviving partner has to pay federal estate tax on the partner's money. So if saying that you should have to recognize our foreign marriage, if that were the case under that rationale, if the government needs to recognize the marriage from any foreign country that creates gay marriage, then there's no reason the government should not have to recognize a foreign polygamous marriage as well. And I'm not waving any sort of red flag regarding polygamy. It's normal in most parts of the world. It's just people need to understand that this is not just same-sex marriage. It is that once you step away from one man and one woman, there is no neutral legal basis upon which you say, and we're only talking about gay marriage, we are ignoring the tens of millions of people worldwide who are in polygamous marriages, many of whom are immigrating to this country. The reality is if we open this up, we're opening it wide up to a complete redefinition of the concept of marriage in this country.
wow, we only got 1 minute. David has a question.
If we lose in this high court this week, then what is our next step? Do we fight at the school level?
Well, if we lose in Hollingsworth v. Perry, if they say there is a federal constitutional right, then that immediately trumps everything in the whole nation. If that happens, then gay marriage is, and I would say in a follow-up lawsuit, polygamy, will be a federal constitutional right that no state or local government can do anything except embrace. So at that point, it takes more than a minute to talk about what the next step is at that point. The bottom line is Hollingsworth will be argued on Tuesday. Windsor will be argued on Wednesday. The court will vote behind closed doors on Friday as to which way they're going on that case, and then they'll start writing both opinions. The opinion should come down at the end of June.
All righty, my
we need
friend.
to pray.
Thank you for being with us. We'll be right back on the Harry Jackson Show.
Tuesday. It's my favorite day. Oh, wait a minute. Cat.
Whoa there, Ralph.
Oh, shoulder. Anyway, where was I? Tuesday, my favorite day, when I get taken to the groomers. And here we are. Oh, yeah, behind here. A little lower. Yeah, that's it. My master's happy to bring me here, too. He likes to watch me play. Oh, looky here. The Nine Runs trick. Legs in the air, still wiggling.
Oh, look at Ralph.
He also likes it because the American Family Association gets a donation because these guys use Cornerstone payment systems to process their credit card transactions. I don't know what that means, but I don't need to worry about it. I'm a dog. Watch out, boys.
If you own a business, you can support the AFA by simply allowing Cornerstone Payment Systems to handle your credit card transactions. 10% of their processing fee is given to the American Family Association. Learn more at cornerstonepaymentsystems.com. Cornerstone Payment Systems is a registered ISO of Harris Bank, Buffalo Grove, Illinois. Member FDIC.
Neil Maman, author of Jesus is Involved in Politics.
Some people are convinced that if a church gets tax deductions, it should not be able to speak out about political issues. But, as I pointed out in earlier broadcasts, this does not follow. The money they don't pay in taxes is money that never belonged to the government. It's the earner's money, not the government's. In fact, how about this sort of a law? If you pay taxes, you get to speak out on political issues. If you don't pay taxes, you still get to speak out on political issues. But if you receive money from the government or receive government contracts, you don't get to speak out about political things. Surely this makes more sense, because now you're getting somebody else's money, and if you can vote yourself more of other people's money, that would be dangerous. Sadly, we passed that dangerous line decades ago. Until Christians take back our legislation, we will continue to head towards oblivion.
Start a small group study using the book Jesus is Involved in Politics. Visit JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com. With today's Faith to Action commentary, here's Janet Porter.
Is the Second Amendment really in danger? It will be if the Senate and President Obama approve the UN's Arms Trade Treaty. There are strong indications of their intent to do this, putting other nations in a position to control our guns. U.S. Representative Mike Kelly has introduced a resolution to oppose the treaty. At a recent press conference, he stated, "We have the right to our Second Amendment, which was enshrined by our founders. Why would we put that up to debate now with people who don't feel the same way we do? Please call your congressman and 2 U.S. senators today at 202-224-3121. Urge them to support Concurrent Resolution 23 in the House and Concurrent Resolution 7 in the Senate to save the Second Amendment."
Visit F2A.org for more commentaries and action steps, along with news, links, and much more for your state. Go to F2A.org.
Welcome back to the Harry Jackson Show. I'm your host, Harry Jackson, joined in the studio with David Parlett. And we were overwhelmed by Ken Kluslowski's answers. We have him on periodically because he does such a good job of putting a lot of information out in 3 ways. A, clearly, succinctly, and in some ways, if I were to equate his answers to the snow that's on the ground here in Washington, it is also knee-deep. And so let me unpack what he said, I think, to you today. He's saying that the Supreme Court has the opportunity today or this week to absolutely reverse the fate of same-sex marriage and make it a law of the land. And if same-sex marriage is legalized from the national basis, it would then open the door for polygamy to be legalized, meaning that if the Defense of Marriage Act is totally eradicated on national level, then you would have the ability for marriage not to be upheld as we know it anywhere in the nation. But there are 2 stages. Defense of Marriage Act, also the Prop 8 kind of legislation. Can marriage be regulated, voted on at the state level. So this thing is very complicated and it's tiered. My belief is that we are going to have the Supreme Court work cautiously. And the Washington Post has declared today in the newspaper that they are not going to go in and just invalidate the vote of 31 states and say that these people were wrong and their right to vote has just been on these issues statewide and individually have been taken back. I think what they're going to do is open up the battlefield and give the American public, who seems to be in favor, if you believe the polls, which I don't, there seems to be in favor of same-sex marriages. In other words, they're not prejudiced against people being in same-sex marriages, to say, if you believe that way, go make it law, state by state. Go reverse the law in the places where it's been voted on before. Go make what you think is right, the law of the land, state by state, and in the nation, the way you envision it to be. Now, if that summation is what happens, and I'm not given legalese, that's not my expertise, but if that is the end of it, Pastor Dave, then we're going to have a lot of work to do, and the American public is going to have to say, if we want to allow people to be married in same-sex marriages or polygamous marriages or other kinds of marital arrangements, then how much of their marital arrangements do we want to affect the way children are taught in schools? How much do we want our religious liberties to be infringed upon by how people choose to live their lives? And we've got to make some hard and fast decisions about what America is going to look like and what we're going to promote. At this juncture, then the church has got to decide, am I going to invest my money in supporting how things are framed? What's your opinion, therefore, in light of that, of why big businesses like Starbucks, Apple, now the NFL, are weighing in on the side of same-sex marriage? They're shaping public opinion. Should we as a church rise up with equal force and shape public opinion, or should we just kind of whimper and go along with it and say there's nothing we can do?
No, we definitely have to hold on to our beliefs. These are core beliefs of who we are based on the powerful Word of God. It's shaped how we live our lives. And no, we can't sit quietly by, but we have to make a stand because it's going to change our life. It's going to change our families. It's going to change our children. It's going to change the future. So even we've gone to the point of not supporting something like Starbucks and giving them money by drinking their coffee. And we know they're afraid. You know, they're certainly afraid for their employees and being sued and everything. But we have to take our stand.
Well, do you think the average church is willing to give $2,000 a year? That's not a lot of money. If every church in the country gave $2,000 a year as an outreach to support the definition of family and marriage, we could turn this whole tide around. Do you think we're that strong that the church would stand up in that way?
Well, no, I don't believe we're that strong because unfortunately, I'm sorry. This is my personal belief. I wish we were, Bishop. I wish we were that strong. I wish the church was that unified based on the Word of God. But there's so many different interpretations, and different pastors are cowering down. They really want to tolerate same-sex. They've probably been allowing that to happen in their own churches, probably in their own choir lofts for so many years that they really feel they can't take a stand against same-sex marriage. So they've given in. They've thrown in the towel.
So you don't think that a fourth of the churches would give $4,000 a year for it?
Well, that might be close. There might be a fourth of the churches that give $4,000 a year, and it might be right around that point.
Well, our lack of involvement will produce darkness taking over, and we've got a chance now to fight for the children's sake at the school level. Somewhere we're going to have to say adults can choose darkness, but let's not let them brainwash our children. A big thing I want to emphasize and reemphasize is there is a March for Marriage that's going to go on the 26th of March, a Tuesday. That's tomorrow on this live broadcast. They're gathering on the National Mall, downtown Washington, D.C., at 12th Street Northwest, and between 8:30 in the morning, National Mall, between 10th and 12th Street Northwest, as we said. And the march will begin at 9:30. We start moving. And then we're going to march to SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the U.S. I'm glad they explained to me all these letters. SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the U.S. There will be a rally back at the National Mall at 11 o'clock. And the rally will have singing and music. It will be fantastic. I know a few of the people that will be singing there, playing there. It will be, we used to use the word off the chain. And maybe it'll help us keep from being on the chain. It will be very, very good. 8:30 Tuesday, gather downtown. If you're going to be in the region, make sure you know that traffic in downtown D.C. is a monster, ugly. Get yourself somewhere to a metro station, get on metro, get downtown by 8:30 in the mall, gather, assemble. 9:30, we start literally marching. No, it won't feel like we're running, but it will be moving. Our rally at 11 o'clock will be a great program with speakers. I'm one of the speakers. Come, I want to see you, shake your hand. We're all going to pray together that the Supreme Court will not lose, or I was going to say they won't lose their mind. Maybe they've already lost their mind. But they'll maintain their equilibrium. Let's go back for a few minutes to talk about the issues of the day about marriage. Now, the Washington Post says that they think that they're going to be cautious about their stand. Now, there's three reasons that they could have made this statement, Dave. One reason is they're trying to come off humble and they think they're going to have a big victory. So instead of saying, we're going to beat you bad, they're really saying it to seem humble. They're expecting a victory. That's one reason. Second reason is they really do believe that the Supreme Court is not about to change such a dramatic law on their watch. I'm convinced that if the powers that be wanted to change marriage, let's say Roberts was sitting back saying, I want this to change, he would have pushed this decision off for another 2 years. Only because you're going to have to change justices in our lifetime. President Obama probably is going to change 2 additional justices. We know he's going to have more liberal justices to come. This is probably going to be the most conservative group of justices we will have in our lifetimes. That's a sad reality. So it's more likely that this group of justices will vote for traditional marriage than the ones that our dear president will put into place after these guys. And if that's the case, the Washington Post is right. But they could surprise us. What do you think?
Yeah, we got surprised, I think, on Obamacare. We could be surprised again. But I certainly have to thank God that we do have a core group of traditional justices at the moment, and so this probably is a great time for the vote to take place. So my hope and prayer is that they stand for marriage, and they do not change the laws of the land.
Okay, very good. I agree with you. On another show, we talk about Obamacare again. I never thought they were going to declare it unconstitutional myself. As a traditional thinker, someone who considers himself a conservative, I think it was a huge victory that it was called a tax. I think they called the duck a duck. I thought it was always a tax. And I think to call it something else, unconstitutional for whatever reason, would not have been fair myself. I think that was the issue. I think social democracies do use government money in an illegitimate way with a burden of unauthorized taxes. I think that was a fair ruling. I think others would have wanted to make it different, but we are stuck with this thing now, and we're going to have to deal with it. I think the Constitution, this is a much more radical constitutional question, however, and the question of marriage being a constitutional right in the pursuit of happiness, I think is much more ethereal and much more constitutionally challengeable. Again, what was told us beforehand, I want you to weigh in, we've only got a few moments, but when the man said that polygamy is the next step if marriage is changed, that was major.
Yeah, and to hear that was legal in 50 countries,
Yeah.
I was a little taken back.
So I cannot believe that the Christian founders were thinking, oh, yeah, get married any way you want to. And, you know, we, the Christian founders of the country, believe you should have polygamy as part of the equation. And so the fundamental question is, are we saying that get married whatever way you want to within the realm of human religion, or are we going to include, I don't want to be funny, certain things I'm not going to say. I'm not going to put bestiality on the table. I'm not going to put marrying inanimate objects on the table. But are we saying whatever your religious or ideological framework, you can marry under any circumstances? Or is there some ideological framework that limits the constructs of marriage? That does not seem to be in the discussion at this point. Should it be, Pastor Dave, with 30 seconds left?
I would certainly think it should be, but because it's not, if they open this door, as we say, the Pandora's box, there will be no limits. But yes, I agree with you. There should be some limit, but whether the Supreme Court will do that or not, they probably will not.
Well, I guess brains much more high-powered than mine are going to have to figure out how to put those philosophical frameworks or brackets around this discussion. And as the Bible says, I don't want to exercise myself in matters too lofty for me. Well, I hope to talk to you again tomorrow. In the meantime, get ready to come and join me for the March for Marriage, 8:30 in the morning, Tuesday. You've been listening to The Harry Jackson Show.